Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan. I'll be your presenter this evening. It's hard to believe it's already June 7th, Monday, June 7th, 2021. And as always, if you'd like additional information, you can go to weather.gov/Alaska, or the old-fashioned way, call for a recorded phone forecast at 1-800-472-0391. And if you have any comments or suggestions, you can send them to peter.chan@noaa.gov. Well, no hazardous advisories, watches, or warnings are currently in effect for the state, though. Of interesting note, the Fairbanks Forecast Office passed along to me this afternoon that Nome has had its fifth coldest four-day period in June. The last 4 days here, 36.8 degrees. That's the average of the high and low temperatures, and they've seen occasional snow showers. There's a pocket of colder air that's sitting over there associated with a stubborn area of low pressure that's persisted in that region for well over a week. Otherwise, parts of the south, central, and eastern interiors, especially toward the Canadian border from the Talkeetna Mountains on up toward the Alaska Range, Fort Yukon, Eagle, those areas northway have seen some isolated scattered thunderstorms pop up with the daytime heating. That'll be the case again Tuesday and to a lesser extent as we head into Wednesday. Overall, though, we are going to see more moisture creep up from the southwestern peninsula up into south central areas, bringing more cloud cover and some occasional showers. Anchorage had a beautiful weekend with sunshine, temperatures up in the 60s to around 70 degrees. Juneau's getting in on some of that. This Monday afternoon, they report some sunshine for a change, and you'll see temperatures there in portions of the southeast back up into the lower, even mid-60s coming up here. Otherwise, look at satellite imagery. You can see that curl in the clouds over Nome. That's that persistent area of low pressure that's just spinning there with a colder pool of air aloft. It's also reflected at the surface, bringing along with it some scattered snow showers. Otherwise, if you look north of Anchorage, you can see the Talkeetna Mountains on up toward just south of Fairbanks, on over toward east of Northway and around Dawson. In the Yukon there with scattered thunderstorms popping up, and then back toward Unalaska there in the Aleutian chain, you'll see a cloud cover associated with an area of low pressure and a occluded front that'll work its way eastward across the region here the next couple of days. So again, we'll see more in the way of some cloud cover areas of south central that enjoyed some sunshine over the weekend. That's going to fill back in with clouds and some bands of rain and showers creeping up through the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, and the Kenai Peninsula here as we head through tomorrow and Wednesday. So today, again, we have low pressure that has been sitting up there around the Seward Peninsula, Bering Strait, still there overnight, with a weak area of low pressure trailing back across the interior into northwest Canada. And then that low pressure that's going to be traveling through the eastern Aleutians with an occluded front pushing up into the tip of the Alaska Peninsula, and weak high pressure giving way there over the Gulf of Alaska as that system rides its way up along the lower portion of the southwest peninsula, with bands of rain spreading upwards into the southwest interior around Dillingham, King Salmon, to Kodiak Island on up toward Prince William Sound and the Kenai for tomorrow. A few isolated scattered thunderstorms will redevelop with the daytime heating across portions of the eastern and southeast interiors, with still potential for some light, lingering mixed showers there in the Seward Peninsula with the cooler weather prevailing. On Wednesday, still a chance of a few isolated thunderstorms from parts of the Alaska Range into the southeast interior. And that area of low pressure will remain primarily, at least the center of it, south of the Gulf of Alaska, but spreading some weakening bands of rain still up into parts of south central. And then as we look back toward the west, still areas of fog along the Arctic coast with just a light patchy precipitation there along areas of the west. So a quick check of temperatures. Lows Tuesday morning will be down in the low and mid 40s across much of the southeast and the south central areas, and then look for temperatures Tuesday afternoon. Could get up to 65 at Ketchikan, lower 60s there throughout the inner waterways, and then back toward the west, cooling down. Anchorage 55, and similarly we're going to see highs only in the low to mid 50s across much of the south central areas, including Kodiak Island. And then for Wednesday, look for lows generally in the mid 40s, with high temperatures still, though, up to about 62 at Juneau, 65 at Skagway, And then as we head west, readings generally in the 50s, maybe Glen Ellen squeaking out a 60. And along the north coast, lows will generally be a little bit below freezing, as well as there in the Seward Peninsula, but 40s in the Yukon Valley, and still could hit 70 at Fort Yukon or Eagle Village. And as we are looking for temperatures to begin to cool down, especially western and central areas here through midweek. Wednesday morning lows still around the freezing mark or a little below that there, the Arctic coast and the Seward Peninsula. And then as we see temperatures still could be up around 70 once again at Eagle Village and Fort Yukon. However, extending down the length, the lower half of the Yukon River Valley cooling into the lower 50s in some cases here, especially as we get toward the YK Delta. We'll show you here in a second. But lows Tuesday morning across the southwest will be in the 30s, mid-30s around Norton Sound, but around or a little above 40 through the southwest peninsula, and then temperatures lower to mid-50s, though the YK Delta's upper 40s to around 50. And Wednesday morning lows will generally be in the upper 30s to lower 40s, with high temperatures confined to the 50s going up the Yukon and Kuskokwim River basins, and highs generally around 50, extending out the length of the Aleutian chain. Well, here's the temperature outlook for mid-June, June 13th through the 17th. It's looking like temperatures could average above normal along and north of the Brooks Range, including the North Slope and Arctic coast, and much of the state a little above normal. And then precipitation is expected to average a little below normal across the east, and then a little above normal the western third of the state. So there we have it heading into June. Certainly we are going to continue to see temperatures continue to slow.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, it's time your aviation weather, and taking a look here for planning purposes if you're heading out on Tuesday or Wednesday. We continue to have a weak low pressure circulation over the Bering Strait area, and then an area of low pressure weakening occluded front working its way along the length of the Alaska Peninsula as we head through the day on Tuesday. Some areas of IFR across the interior, especially central Yukon, south side of the Brooks Range, and also around the western Alaska Range, and most extensively across the southwest peninsula. As we go into the Tuesday afternoon, we'll see more widespread IFR conditions from just east of the Seward Peninsula in the interior, dropping southward throughout the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island. There could be some isolated thunderstorms of portions of the Alaska Range out across the eastern flats there, northeast of Fairbanks and down southeastward toward Northway. And then as we go into Wednesday morning, we'll see IFR conditions associated with that moisture that's been flung northward with the frontal system and low pressure up through the southwest, east side of the Kenai, Kodiak Island, with pretty widespread IFR conditions off the west coast there in the Bering Sea. And for Wednesday afternoon, IFR conditions hugging the west coast and throughout the Bering Sea, and then on up into the beginning of the southwest peninsula and Kodiak Island, extending out into the central Gulf. And additional thunderstorms, isolated storms will be possible, especially in the far southeast interior. So past conditions, Anaktuvik will generally see IFR conditions to the north, improving MVFR to the south. That'll be the same situation there at Adigan, IFR generally to the north, and MVFR off to the south. Better conditions flying there toward Lake Clark and Merrill. MVFR should hold throughout the day on Tuesday. Now as we go up to Rainy Pass, we'll see IFR conditions to MVFR, and that'll be the case with Windy as well, IFR to MVFR. And Isabel, IFR possibly becoming VFR there by midday to afternoon, though there could be an isolated thunderstorm up there off of the north entrance. And the same thing here as we round about Mentasta, MVFR to VFR, though isolated thunder possible areas up toward the north entrance. And that would be the case. Tanita could see perhaps isolated storm out toward the west entrance, though MVFR conditions should hold throughout the day. And Portage is expecting MVFR conditions with areas of rain showers developing. And then for Chilkoot and White, MVFR becoming VFR, and that'll be the case throughout the day, Tuesday. Freezing levels are generally below 2,000 feet down to near the surface in the western portion of the state, especially the Seward Peninsula. They do come up to around or a bit above 6,000 feet across the eastern third of the state, upper Yukon Valley, and then also as we head southwestward across the Alaska Peninsula, highest freezing levels of 8 to 10,000 feet. There is a potential for some icing between 3 and 13,000 feet across the north and northwest, extending out into the Brooks Range. Southwest areas, including Cook Inlet, as well as the Kenai and Kodiak Island, 6 to 16,000 feet, and then much of the central Bering area above 6,000 feet. Keep in mind there could be some isolated thunderstorms extending across especially the eastern areas, though there could also be some isolated thunder back toward the western Alaska range too. So upper level jet stream winds, we have a weak circulation, low pressure circulation there around the Bering Strait, and then more importantly southwest winds of 60 to 70 knots coming in across the west and southwest interior, and dropping south of the Aleutians there's a 120 knot northwesterly jet core bypassing the region. Down to 9,000 feet, low pressure circulations continue there at the Bering Strait, and then also along the southwest coast, with some interior areas seeing winds of 30 upwards to 40 knots from the south there at Cook Inlet, and on the other side, backside of the low pressure and frontal system, working its way through the Alaska Peninsula, winds out of the north at 40 knots, and we bring it down to the 3,000 foot level, and you can see that low pressure circulation there in the Alaska Peninsula will be working its way east and passing just south of Kodiak Island, though ahead of it some winds from the south of 45 knots, backside northeast to north winds of 40 knots. And a quick check of turbulence. Small area of surface to 4,000 feet turbulence possible in the extreme northwest. So that's about it for aviation weather concerns. And if you are heading out, surely check the latest conditions and have a safe flight.
We can't just put the fires out because we can't put them out. We've tried that now for a century and it doesn't work. It just makes the next one worse.
You may see a place like this and think, total devastation. And it's not your fault for thinking that.
But that depiction is, as we've learned from countless experts over the last 2 weeks, not the whole story, and not how you should think about wildfires.
The truth is, there are lots of types of habitats out west, and fire affects them all in unique ways. So it's important to start thinking about the big picture with wildland fires. So let's first rewind. To help us understand what's going on out west, Rob and I started calling up the experts, and what we found was that the story of fire, particularly in the west, is complex. So to understand it, we planned a road trip.
Road trip time.
The goal of our road trip was to see as many forests as we could and meet experts around the region to help us understand the role fire plays out here. First destination was to find the forest burned by the now famous Great Fires of 1910. And at the heart of what is known as the Big Blow-Up, the logical first place to stop, the city of Wallace.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi. Good. Haley and I are in this cute town of Wallace, Idaho, which was completely destroyed by the 1910 fires. You can see how much damage this fire actually did. Let's send up the drone and see what the surroundings look like now. What we found was a small town surrounded by a dense forest, with every single tree just over 100 years old.
So everything we see behind us now, that's all new growth since 1910.
And to help us put these historic fires and the forests around Wallace in perspective, we met up with historian Diane Smith.
This is Wallace, and here are your fires.
All of this is the 1910 fires.
This is not that unusual. The fact is, it just was at a time in our development as a country. We noticed it, we paid attention to it, and we got the national attention for it.
Right. As it turns out, these fires helped reinforce the idea at the time that every fire needed to be suppressed at all costs. And this suppression for so long has led to new problems, namely thick forests full of fuel. But don't just take my word for it. Let me show you the difference. Notice how different this place is than this one that has been thinned out quite heavily in the past, or like an area like this that's been burnt quite frequently. In fact, both of these areas show how many forests would have looked in the past under regular burns. The dead and low-growing material gets consumed easily by fire, very much unlike this forest, which has had fire suppression for over 100 years and could lead to a high-intensity fire.
And all of this dry, dead material, that's problematic.
So we went looking for a big fire and just followed the smoke. Oh gosh, a huge crown fire. I gotta get this. These high-intensity fires aren't great because in many forests they kill all the trees over a large area, even in forests that used to be very resistant to frequent fires. And nobody knows that better than the people that work in this particular forest.
There's green coming back, and I guess I've gotten somewhat used to it, and I still have hope that the entire Sierra Nevadas won't look like this, that we can maybe get ahead of it. So the fires nowadays can move from the surface right into the tree canopies really easily, where in the past, fires would have kept trees pruned, they would have kept fuel densities low, and so now you end up with a lot more high severity fires in the West than had a fire regime kept under its historic recurrence. This to me is more a lesson of fire exclusion and keeping fire out of the system. If we're keeping it out of when it would burn with a beneficial effect, it will burn, and the probability of it burning at an unbeneficial state is higher.
So again, this is where it's complicated. We thought if only we could stop the fires, we'd win the fight. But the fires like the King Fire here show that stopping the fires only made it worse. Add that to the fact that we're living closer than ever to these wild lands. So to help us understand the wildland-urban interface, we met up with CAL FIRE. And as we were pulling up to this neighborhood, one of the residents quickly came out to tell us about the latest fire.
Yeah, our biggest fear is fire. It was very scary. I mean, everybody was honking and get out, and you know, there's a fire.
This is the risk across California. The response piece alone isn't going to solve this challenge if the homeowners aren't organized.
Because we're all in the same boat. One match away from everybody losing everything. It's a real fear.
Literally, we could have that fire spread up in here within a matter of seconds.
Wow.
California is going to have fires. We're not going to stop all the fires in California, so we have to have an infrastructure that's fire resistant. We need to work on policies that help us engage in active management of our forest. That's using prescribed fire as a tool. It's all the things in the toolbox. It's a combination of managing our forest and a combination of protecting our communities that are in them.
If it wasn't complicated enough, this made it very clear that you can't just let the fires burn whenever they start. The forests need to be managed to help mitigate the risk to us. But using fire seems to be one of the keys to making things safer, and knowing the science behind fire is always key to implementing good management.
Fire Sciences Lab, right over here.
So we made a stop at the Missoula Fire Lab to try to understand what we know about fire.
You see the flames at the very top and how they're sticking to the slope?
They really are. Everybody's laying down.
They're laying down. Well, that's flame attachment. Actually a very difficult thing to understand.
Here at the Fire Lab, the scientists study the basics of fire. Understanding the complexities here helps firefighters and forest managers in the field better predict and fight wildland fires.
Fires are inevitable. The only choices that we really have is what kind of fire to have and when do we want it. And that's it. Almost? Ready. You're ready. Jason's ready.
Mark's team is prepping to light a huge bed of precisely cut cardboard.
You're not going to be in any danger. So when the lights go out, don't move. Gasoline.
This is one of many experiments they'll run to understand the physics of fire, how it moves, how it spreads, and all of this measured by precise scientific instruments and high-speed cameras. Tens of thousands of pieces of cardboard up in flames in mere seconds. The ongoing research will help us better understand fire with the ultimate goal that we can live better with it. But can we do that? There is one forest we knew of that seems to have figured out this coexistence with fire, a place where fires burn all summer, every summer. It's part of their way of life and a mentality we wanted to know about. And here we went out with our guides Frank Lake and Steve Valentine, who work with the local U.S. Forest Service and tribe to help keep a healthy forest.
This is perfect. The fire's basically come through and cleared out the understory. And all that's left are the trees.
Yeah, it's black and it's charred, and you just see a few of the earliest sprouts, but you come back in here a year, it's gonna be alive again.
And to many, this may seem destroyed, but they view it differently here.
That fire's medicine, because it's not if it comes, it's when it comes. We need fire, and fire needs us.
You see, fire needs people to remind us how important fire is to the ecosystem. Frank and Steve's ancestors have been burning this forest for millennia. It's now part of what makes the forest special. They just want to make sure that it's not forgotten.
Basically, what you leave behind is what's important.
When they say this is your foods and your medicines, your sacred places, your springs, your water, that's essential, that's who we are as people. We have to learn to live with fire. We have to learn to respect fire. We have to maintain that security. That's why I do what I do.
Haley and I have learned a lot on our journey. We've learned that fire is complicated, and it's not as black and white as we make it out to be, and it is an integral part of our forests. They've had fire running through them for thousands of years, and they will continue to have fire in them in the future. And we can't always put the fires out. We have to decide what kind of fires to live with, and that is why we need to work with these fire crews from around the country. We also need a public who understands the importance of fire on the landscape. A healthy forest, you see, is a forest that lives with fire.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
It's now time for marine weather. We'll quick check today's sea ice edge. And we continue to see melting being the primary thing that's helping the ice to break up now across the lower Chukchi Sea and along the Arctic coast. Much of the Bering Strait is opened up, with just a few areas of a little bit of ice remaining around St. Lawrence Island and floating about there in Norton Sound. And we'll continue to see this melting trend rather rapid now, as we're only 2 weeks away from the summer solstice. So for Tuesday's marine weather forecast, inner waterways winds will generally be somewhat variable there, but 10 to 15 knots and waves of 2 to 3 feet. And along the Gulf Coast of the southeast, we are looking for winds to primarily be out of the northwest, around 15 knots and swells of 4 to 6 feet. On Wednesday, winds will become more southeast to southerly across the inner waterways at 15 to 20 knots and waves 3 to 4 feet. Whereas on the Gulf side, we're looking at winds from the south and southeast at 15 to 20 knots and swells of 5 to 7 feet. Across south central areas of note, we'll see winds ahead of an occluded front picking up out of the southeast and south at the mouth of Cook Inlet and just between the Kenai and Kodiak Island, upwards to 30 knots and swells of 10 to 12 feet there. Elsewhere, swells will be lesser, a few feet off the Kenai and in through Prince William Sound in the north end of Cook Inlet. And then on Wednesday, with low pressure passing well south and southeast of Kodiak Island, winds will be more out of the east and northeast on the Gulf side at 25 knots, swells of 5 to 7 feet off the Kenai, and upwards to 8 feet the lower Cook Inlet there toward the mouth, with winds out of the northeast at 25 knots. For the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, the winds ahead of the occluded front will be out of the southeast at about 20, upwards to 30 knots for Tuesday, with swells of 7 feet. On the Bering side, they are going to be trying to turn back around more toward the northwest as we head through the day, and especially into Wednesday. And by Wednesday, we're looking at winds out of the northwest on the Pacific and Gulf sides at 20 to 30 knots and swells of 7 to 9 feet. Westerly 20 knots and swells of 3 to 5 feet on the Bering side of the Alaska Peninsula. Across the Aleutians, the eastern Aleutians generally northwest winds at 25 to 30 knots and waves of 8 to 9 feet on the North Pacific side, and 6 to 8 feet on the Bering side. Western Aleutians, though, winds are going to be trying to turn more back toward the southwest around 50 knots, swells of 6 feet. And then on Wednesday, the eastern Aleutians will see winds predominantly out of the west at 20 to 25 knots, swells of 4 to 6 feet on the Bering side and 5 to 8 feet on the North Pacific side. And the western Aleutians, southwest winds 15 to 20 knots and waves of 4 to 5 feet. Across western areas, winds will initially be kind of mixed bag, offshore flow along the west coast, but areas around and south of St. Matthew and St. Paul and St. George Islands 10 to 20 knots, wave 6 feet. And as we go through the day on Wednesday, winds will turn more toward the west-southwest 20 to 25 knots. Highest swells upwards to 8 feet or so, 7 to 8 feet south of St. Matthew and around St. Paul and St. George. Heading up to along the Arctic coast, easterly winds of 25 knots, and where there is some open water, waves of 4 to 5 feet. Offshore flow there in through the northwest coast and Kotzebue Sound, 20 knots, leading to waves of 4 feet. And then on Wednesday along the Arctic coast, 15 to 20 knot easterly winds, 3 to 4 foot waves. And areas still offshore flow up there along the northwest coast at 15 to 20 knots, though winds are going to try to turn more toward the south across the Seward Peninsula at 15 knots and waves 3 to maybe as high as 6 feet just off of St. Lawrence Island. And looking at the weather map on Tuesday, there's that low pressure tracking across the tip of the Alaska Peninsula, heading out toward the east-southeast into the North Pacific, largely bypass the heart of the Gulf on Wednesday and weaken. Meanwhile, we still have some weak low pressure areas eastern Russia, and we'll continue to see some areas of fog along the Arctic coast with easterly flow. So that does it for our show here on this Monday, June 7th. Thank you for watching. We appreciate your viewership, and as always, if you have any questions, feel free to contact us or submit any photos you may have from your particular community. And be sure and join us.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.